Good evening, everybody. My name is Mildred, and I am an alcoholic, and I am delighted to be here with you. Uh, I'm always delighted to be at a meeting. I was thinking as we were reading the preamble and the steps and the traditions, I think the more often I hear it, the more I love it, the more it talks to me. And so I'm Mildred. I'm from Toronto. I'm an alcoholic. I belong to the Rocks Glen Traditional Group. I'm an active member there. We meet on Mondays and Thursdays. and my dry date is May the 18th, 1973. So I've been sober a long time. I have had a sponsor all those years. My first sponsor I had for 44 years. He taught me well. He taught me the principles. He taught me not just how to read the book. He taught me how to take those principles, and when I was in trouble, how I would apply those principles. And I think about him so often. When he passed, I got another sponsor, and that's different. It's different when you're 44 years sober and you get a sponsor. But it's the same process. Somebody that can talk to me, that sees some things I might not see. And so I'm just ecstatic, really. I have to tell you, to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And as the time goes by, I appreciate it more and more. And it wasn't always that way. So I'll spend a little time talking about what the drinking was like and what I think about that, because I think that my life is about so much more than not drinking. And why did I drink the way I did? Why did I have to wind up in a garbage dump on a park bench, living like a tramp, and then spend the first year of my sobriety in a really bad place? You know, I started out life on a farm in Saskatchewan, which is the Midwest of Canada. And we were 10, and we were Roman Catholic. And every one of those pieces is important because we went to church. And that meant I had heard about God. But by the time I was 3 or 4, I was crying a lot. Why? Because one of the 10 of us had been injured at birth, and she couldn't learn as fast as other kids, and they kept her in grade 3 till she was 16. And I was 3, and she cried, and I cried. I thought it was mean and awful, and somebody had to change it. Remember, I was the baby of the family, and I don't have a horror story. If I wanted anything, they babied me and they gave it to me, and they were kind and nice to me. And then I went and said, you got to make Dora stop crying. And I, as a child, I didn't know what that was all about. I expected they were going to do that, and they didn't. And you know, when I was little, I'm old enough to say this, when I was little, people didn't talk about how their feelings and all that. They just lived right, lived well, and assumed, I guess. People didn't, as I said, didn't talk about it. So I made my own conclusions. I asked you to fix my world, and you didn't. And my conclusion was, nobody cares about me. I don't matter. I'm not important. I say that to you because that became the basis of there. It became the basis of how I saw the world and how I acted. I didn't wind up on a park bench because the world is bad. I wound up on a park bench because of the way I thought, the way I believed, the way I treated people, the way I was. And I understand that now. And I also understand that the solution to all that, the answer to all that, is right here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I did never expect to have the kind of life that I have now, to have the kind of joy I have now, to have the kind of peace of mind that I have now. This is just an absolutely, to me, an amazing program. Anyway, so I went to God. When family didn't fix the world, I went to God. And I thought the God that made the stars and the God that made the aurora borealis would fix my sister. And God did, but not when I demanded it and not the way I demanded it. And so God to me became a problem. You see, this is important because when I came in, I didn't pray when I came into the program. Why do you pray to this God? Because he doesn't answer you anyway. God to me was kind of a useless twit. And so how did life go? I'm smart. I'm not a good sports person, but I'm smart. I finished high school by the time I was 14. That should tell you something. And but something had happened in between. When I was 5, I took a drink. And this little person who used to cry a lot and who felt life really was a bad place to be, experienced what Dr. Silkworth says. He says we get the sense of ease and comfort. And I got that sense of ease and comfort. And that's what I chased for 35 years. You know, everything I read in the big book, I identify with except one paragraph. It's that paragraph where it says all the things we did to try to stop drinking. It was never on my agenda to stop drinking. I wanted that ease and comfort. And I used to think, I need the stuff that's in the bottle. And that's why I was alcoholic from the word go. You know, and how do you drink when you're 5 and 6 and 7? I didn't have to have anybody tell me to steal. I didn't have to need somebody to tell me if you steal the alcohol, you have to put water back in so people don't know you took the booze. I managed really quite well. I didn't drink as much as I wanted, but I knew where all the families we visited, where their booze was, always had an excuse. I'm clever when it comes to getting alcohol. And that's the way I lived the next 35 years. I needed the booze and I had no moral issue. I had no legal problem with stealing, lying, cheating, doing whatever. You know, I'm not going to go through a big story, but I'm telling you, that's the way I lived because I was two people. I did not like the way I felt sober. And I felt wonderful when I drank, at least at the beginning. And so I wanted that feeling. And the other part of it is I functioned when I drank because all that old fear and all the anger and all that stuff, I hate the world and I hate you and I hate God and I hate, that all went away. And I loved everything and I felt I could cope. So I graduated from high school when I was 14 and I couldn't get into university. So I hung around. And that's one part of my drinking life. I really had a good time. I was part of a big choir. Most of them were boys. We drank a lot. We partied a lot. We went around the country singing and I loved it. And then somebody had to spoil it. One day, one of the girls in the choir announced she was going to be a nun. And everybody made a fuss over her. And I was no longer the center of attention. And I did not like that. And so I waited 3 weeks and then I announced I'm going to become a nun, expecting now they'd fuss over me. And instead they laughed at me. They said, you don't belong in a convent. And then I started looking for a convent that would even take me. And most of them said, no, you're too wild. We don't want people like you. And finally, I found a convent in Hamilton, Ontario, near Toronto. And they took me sight unseen. And I often say smelled. They didn't smell me either because I was drunk the night I entered. And I have to tell you, I stayed in the convent 15 years. See, there was a part of me, even though I felt God was a useless twit, something in my soul knew that was my answer. And so, in a sense, the convent was an okay place for me to be. I stayed there, as I said, 15 years, and I was competent. I did a lot of stuff. I was a musician. I was organist in 3 churches. I trained the servers. I knew the Latin and all that stuff. It's amazing to me what you can get away with when you drink and when you're competent. And nobody ever said anything to me till near the end. Mother Superior called me and she said, you know, sister, she said, I kind of think you don't belong in a convent. She said, I think you're young enough to make a life for yourself. You don't have to leave. But she said, I think maybe you should. She was really enlightened. We wrote to Rome. I got my dispensation. And despite the fact that I was a very well-educated young woman, I knew nothing. I remember standing on the convent steps. I was no longer Sister Mary Eugenia. I had my secular name back. I had my secular clothes on again. And I was dispensed from the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Good to go. And I thought, my days of unhappiness are over. I can tell you, nothing gets changed because you change the outside. And I'll explain about that. So I'm out of the convent now. 2 days go by and I find the bar. I find the bar and I love the bars. I'd never seen this before. Red carpets on the floor and all these clinking glasses and all the rest of it, and men. And I loved the men and the men loved me. And I went down a path of degradation, shaming. 3 months go by and I'm put in jail. And I remember saying to the policeman, you can't do this to me. I'm an ex-nun, as he locked the door and put me into my cell. And I made such a fuss that I never want to forget this. The chief of police came down to my cell. He said, you're really an ex-nun? He said, you disgust me. And he had a paper with the charges against me. And he said, I've never seen an ex-nun in the jail before. And he said, you better make sure you never come back here. Because he said, this is awful. And I still remember him yelling at me and saying, what's wrong with you? Well, how do you answer that? And I still remember thinking of the day I took my vows. I didn't remember. I've got a picture standing on my bureau, a picture of the white, all in white. And I remember walking up the aisle that day. And the organ was playing and the choir was singing Magnificat anima mea Dominum, which in English means my soul magnifies the Lord and my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. And that day, that was the truth. And then you go to the altar and you prostrate on the floor and you give your life to God. And if you had said to me that day, how is it? I would have said, it's amazing. I'm done with my old way of life. What I didn't know was I was only beginning, because I was drunk 3 days later and I was drunk most of the time I was in the convent. And I'll leave it at that. And so I'm out of the convent and I'm in jail. And 11 months go by and I meet Dr. Hoffer. And Dr. Hoffer was a friend of Bill Wilson. And so there were 6 psychiatrists on staff and he was one of them. And he took a look at me and he said to my doctor, she doesn't have all that psychiatric illness. She's an alcoholic and should go to AA. And my doctor said, no, it'll interfere with her program. Well, that's just a joke. So eventually I did go to AA and I was happy to go. Why? What did I know about AA? I knew something because about 10 years before, and I never forgot it, my dad had called me and he called me about my brother who they said was going to die. And he said, he's not going to die. He said, there's an organization has come to the prairies. And he said, they call it Alcoholics Anonymous. See, that would have been 1951, 52 when this happened. And my dad said, I don't know what it is, but he said, your brother is going to die. He's been transformed. And he said he doesn't drink anymore. That's what I knew. So when Dr. Hoffer said I should go to AA, what did I hear? I'm going to go to AA. I'm going to be transformed. I'm not going to drink anymore. And my dad is going to be ecstatically happy with all of this. And that was good. I went to AA. No clue that I had to participate. I sat in my seat waiting. They're going to transform me. I didn't know what that meant. And I waited 3 weeks. I did. And by that time, I was nuts because me without alcohol and without drugs can't do it. So I sat in AA 5.5 years stoned. And I won't go into that except to say it was a precious 5.5 years. And I'll tell you why. Because I was in Prince Albert at that time, part of the time, Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and Cease Corrigal was alive. And Cease Corrigal was a friend of Mac Cheater. And Mac Cheater lived there, but he was also a friend of Chuck Chamberlain. And Chuck used to come almost every year to a conference or something. And every time Chuck came, he would sit with me and he would talk sense to me. What he thought was sense. He'd say, you have only one problem, Mildred. I still remember he'd shake the finger and he'd say, and if you get over that, you'll be fine. So in Chuck's mind, and if you read his book, The New Pair of Glasses, that's what he says, separation. And you know, today in 2021, every book that I read, they all talk about the problem is separation. I think I'm separate from you. I think I'm separate from God. And if I'm thinking like that, life goes to hell, which is really what happened to me. And so I sat there, and even Chuck Chamberlain, human power can't do this. And he let me know that human power can't fix what's wrong with me. That's why this program is so beautiful. It's so powerful. If you think about the steps, we have a design for living that works. It's not just a bunch of words that you can read and talk about. You learn it and you do it and you change. That's it. That's how this works. But I didn't know that at the time. I had a long ways to go. In that 5.5 years, they locked me up 32 times. They locked me up in psych wards. I had 38 electroshock treatments. I can tell you they would not give anybody 38 electroshock treatments today. Nowadays, occasionally they use them and they give maybe 6. I had 38. And lots of therapy. Oh my God, therapy. And we talked about everybody and who was wrong. And I don't remember ever talking about what was wrong with me. And eventually I married my very own psychiatrist. Now there's a smart thing to do, I can tell you, if you're really nuts. I married my psychiatrist and that was disaster. Didn't last very long. But again, I had everything. We had the big house. We had the housekeeper. We had the cars. He was director at a hospital. And life should, if the outside could fix me or fix what's wrong with me, I would have been okay. I had every opportunity in the world. And finally, we separated. We lost everything because it turns out he too was alcoholic. We both drank, we lost everything. And I went to a park bench. I don't ever want to experience that again. I lived there as a tramp for 2 months. And on the morning of May the 18th, 1973, that's my dry date, the police took me off the bench and took me to a psych ward. I don't know what I had done. I don't know to this day, but they took me to the psych ward, and I was in the psych ward 2.5 days. And Sunday morning, May the 20th, I made up my mind. They were going to discharge me. I had no home. I had no money. I had no friends. You know, there is something quite amazing about going to the dump, because there comes a point. For me, I had to go there right to the end, where when she said we're going to discharge you, I didn't have one clue, not one, how I could live. Lots of education, lots of information. I had tried church. I had tried all kinds of stuff, and it didn't work. And the way I saw it, it's okay for you. It works for you, but I'm odd. It doesn't work for me. So I'm out of here. And I planned suicide. I said, that's it. I'm out of here. And I remember thinking, I don't care what's on the other side, because I was raised as a Catholic. I didn't go to church anymore, but I still had that idea in my head. And I thought, I don't care what's on the other side. It can't be worse than this. And so I asked the nurse to get my coat, and she went to get my coat, and I had a spiritual experience. Go figure. Go figure. It makes perfect sense. However, if you read the book says we have to concede to our innermost selves. I had spent my life conceding to everybody because I knew if I admitted that I had done bad stuff, before you got to me, you treated me better. So yeah, I'd concede to anybody. Yeah, I'm a bad person. Yeah, I drank too much. Yeah. And nothing happened in here. But that morning, I conceded to my innermost self. Not that I was alcoholic. I knew that a long time ago. What I conceded was, I don't know how to live. That to me was the difference. I don't know how to live. The way I see this power today, that power has no problem with that. If I'm willing to admit, I don't know how to live, I don't know how to do this, grace can flow. That's what it was about. Because in a heartbeat, I was changed. I remember standing there, and honest to God, it's exactly the way I'm telling it. I thought, I don't have to drink anymore. Something has happened inside. And it was absolutely right. Something had happened inside. I'm sober 48 years and some months. And in that time, I have never had the compulsion. I've never had an idea maybe I should drink again or any of that. It's done. When grace grabs you, it grabs you. And if you work with it, you see, that's what I think. You have to work with grace. And I remember thinking, I don't know how to live sober. And I've learned something. I was to a funeral this morning, and I was to a visitation yesterday of a young man who was found dead about 10 days ago. He's a man who had tried to get into AA, tried to stay sober, and he couldn't pull it off. And he used to say to his mother, I'd like to be sober, but I can't do it. And that morning, that's what got me. I don't know how to live sober. You'll have to send me somebody. And I swear to you, there was a rap on the door, a man stood there and he said, I saw you, you're in trouble. I know are you alcoholic? I said, yeah, you want to make something of it? And he said, no. And, but he said, I know where you could go for help. 1973, I don't know about Tennessee. Toronto, Ontario, there were no treatment centers. One, Dr. Bell had started a hospital treatment kind of, and he allowed addicted people to come in there. This man said, I'll take you there. And he did the next day. They took me in, and that's where life started. I was there, I don't know, 3 weeks maybe. And then again, I'm being dismissed. I don't have a home. I don't have a job. I can't function yet. And they gave me enough money to get a room on Skid Row. That's where I lived my first year. My first year, I spent sweeping a floor, a factory floor. And I didn't always have food. I think back to that year, and I think back, God's activity in our lives is unbelievable. You know, when I was sober 3 years, I met Tom Ivester, used to come out to Prince Albert. And he took me aside and he said, you don't like God very much, do you? And I said, no. And because I didn't realize what had happened. I had no idea. I was living. And you know what? I think if we do the best we can, whatever it is that we need is given. And he said, I have found the power of good. Didn't say God, said I found the power of good. And for somebody like me who felt bitter toward God, how am I going to do the AA program? The power of good. And he said that power of good has taken me to a way of life I couldn't have imagined. And you know, as I sit here today talking to you, I'll tell you, that power of good has taken me to a place I couldn't have imagined. I couldn't have imagined the stuff, and it's not about the stuff, but it's about the way I see life, the way I see the world, the way I see people, the way I've changed inside, the way I've been changed, I should say. So at the institution, that's the other thing. You know, as I look at my 48 years, have they been always easy? No. Have they been difficult? Sometimes. But always, I have been given what I've needed. Sometimes it's been a book. Sometimes I go to a meeting and I hear what I can hear. Sometimes it was my sponsor. It's always God has intervened and given me and met me where I am. I totally believe that. And that's why I think that young man that left us 2 weeks ago, it was time for him to go because he wasn't making it. He couldn't seem to get it together in this world. I don't think we really, I don't feel I understand God's ways. I just suit up and show up and let life evolve as it does. I was in the institution one day to see Dr. Maharaj, and a man invited me to a meeting, and that's where AA began. Because for 6 months, I just lived on Skid Row. I was hungry. I was cold sometimes. I had no friends. And he said, you want to come to a meeting? Well, yeah. I didn't know where we were going. It was to a meeting of AA, and I fell in love. And 48 years later, here I am in the middle of it. And I've never left the middle. That's the secret. You know, I've never left the middle. It's not always been easy. It's not always been pleasant, but I've always been here and I've always gotten exactly what I need. Maybe not the day I demand it, but I always get the message the information, the power, the help, whatever it is. So I came into AA and two men stepped forward because I got a sponsor who got drunk. And two men stepped forward and they said, Mildred, you're too sick to stay here if you don't do the steps. See, that's where I learned the power of the steps. I was crazier than could be. And they read the book to me and they told me what to do. And that's how I got through the steps. And they were right. I got to stay. And I think if I hadn't done those steps, I'm not sure I would have gotten to stay because I was here. I did the steps. I did what they told me. It's not complicated. What I believe now about the steps is we can talk till we're blue in the face. But what do I do about those steps? How do I take those principles and apply it to my life? Is my life better? Do I treat people kinder? Do I think different? And all of that, that to me is what those steps have really given. So I got to stay. And then the God shots started. My friend Ken Devaney, he talks about God shots. Those things that happened that one day the voice said to me, it's time to get off Skid Row. You should check out and see if there are any teaching jobs. And within 2 days, I had a teaching job. And I'm telling you, they didn't realize the day I went for that interview, I was all together. They couldn't wait to hire me. And I was still quite crazy. I'm telling you, putting me in the middle of 200 educators who were sane was not a good thing to do. And thank God I had the new sponsor who told me and helped me get my way through that. And 2,000 students, 18, 19, 20, they didn't care. They cut you off at the knees if you didn't know. He taught me how to treat situations. He taught me what the principles were that would make life work. So I got through that, and then at 7 years, a friend said, you should buy a house. I just laughed. House? I don't have any money. My sponsor made me pay off my debts. And yet within 10 days, I bought my first house. And as I say, I didn't have to sleep with anybody either to do it. That was the good news. And I was to buy a lot of houses. And so I'll finish this first 20 years, 21 years of my sobriety. I was a good member of AA. And I learned how to deal with life on the outside. But what I didn't know was I wasn't changing on the inside. I was thinking, you know, I've got all these houses, I've got all this money, I'm okay. I was not okay. And at 21 years, I was suicidal. You know, sometimes people say to me, you shouldn't say that. It means the program doesn't work. No, it does not. It means that I needed to change. The program works just fine. And so God sent me the people who taught me what I needed to do in order to change inside. And everything changed then. It was at that time I came to the States. You know, I'm always very grateful to people in the States because so much of my sobriety has come from people like Chuck Chamberlain and Mac in Florida and so on. You know, I've learned so much. And I learned about these old ideas I carried and how to get rid of them. And my life started to take a different view. See, the first 21 years, I was all about the outside. And I was going to meetings, don't get me wrong. And I'm sure that if you think about your life, the first part of it is what it is. And then I started to develop inside and I started to meditate. That's really when things changed for me. I started to meditate and I started to do a lot of spiritual reading and talk to my sponsor, and I started to change. And then the God shot started. See, I think God is always there. And I think grace is always available to us. If I'm not ready to accept it, I can't have it. It doesn't work. But at this point, I wanted to change. And one day the phone rang, and it was Father O'Brien. And he said, I want you to come and give a retreat. And I just laughed. I said, you know how many times I've been excommunicated? That's in the church. That happens when you're bad like I was. And he said, I don't care. He said, I want you to come and give some AA retreats. And that was influential in my life because I really started to study the program. Not that I think studying it, but I started to really try and say, how does this affect me? If I live the way this step says, if I do that, what's going to happen? And because I thought, if I'm going to give a retreat, I'm not a hypocrite. I've got to have a better understanding. And it drove me, and it was good. And one of the things that happened because of that was the walls came down. I don't know if any of you were raised with walls. I sure put up walls when I was little. You know, when people didn't fix Dora, and when I felt so isolated from people and people didn't do what I wanted, I put up walls, and I didn't know that. And people used to say, you intimidate me. And I thought it was a compliment. It wasn't a compliment. They were saying, we can't get near you because you're phony. You don't let us really see how you are. And you know what? You can't really change when that's the case. So when that happened, when the walls came down, that's when I really started to do the work to change. That's when I began to see how I didn't like people. That's when I began to see how I manipulated people, how I tried to control people, how I felt not okay. And my thinking was, if you treated me better, if you treated me this and this and this and this, then I'd be okay. I don't know if you have any of that. I didn't understand all that process. Bill talks about it in step 8 in the 12 and 12, where he says we've got this stuff buried from childhood. And God sent me the people who taught me, and I began to see, and I began to change. I saw things like page 55. Man, what a message. You know, I've read widely different religions and whatever. You know what? They all say the same thing. They just say it a little different, but it's all there in glowing color. It's all there in glowing color. When Bill says we have a spiritual malady, my main problem never was drinking alcohol. My main problem has always been a problem with God. You know, and one of my friends from Russia, he tells the story of how he was raised as an atheist under communism, and how when he came to AA, he just couldn't get it. And he couldn't get that idea of God. And he said, finally, what he realized was, I don't have to understand God, but I have to be willing to learn and to grow in my experience of God. And he's never had another drink. The last time I saw him, he was sober 22 years. Pretty good stuff. But for me, that page 55 really got to me. Deep inside every man, woman, and child. You mean I can't hate anymore? That's right. You mean I can't judge anymore? That's right. You got to make up your mind. If you believe that page, then it doesn't say I have to agree with you. It doesn't say I have to approve of you. But if you read the page, it says deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. Not everybody knows that. And so people do evil things. People do murders. They do all kinds of stuff. But That's the change. You see, I think Gandhi saw that. I think Nelson Mandela saw that. I think Martin Luther King saw that regardless of how we conduct ourselves in the third dimension world, in the fourth dimension, God is always there. And that's how things change. And that's why on further back in the book, I think it's 164, he says, see to it that your relationship with him is right. You know what? If I hate you, if I judge you and I criticize you, my relationship with God can't be right, because if that power is within you, I don't have to agree with you, but I do have to recognize the power. And that's why Gandhi always said, namaste. I love the fact that Einstein one time wrote him and said, what does that mean? You say that, and I don't know what it means. And Gandhi wrote back, the God in me salutes the God in you. And you know, today, with all the hatred that we've got going and all the racism and all the negativity and all that, what if we could just get that and say, the God in me salutes the God in you? The world would change. And I think the world is changing, because in the days when Chuck said to me, you think you're separate, that's your problem. There are a lot of people getting it today, that everything is one, that God is everywhere present and so on. And, you know, when I think about this whole process, I'm just always stunned by it. And every time I talk, I think about it, that, you know, this isn't something that I decided was going to change. My life has evolved because I have given in, where I finally got it. I'm not God. I don't have the power. That's why our step says I'm powerless over alcohol, but I'm powerless over everything, because the book says there is one who has all power. That one is God. And you know what I often say to people, I'm sure not perfect, but I'm telling you, I am nowhere near I was 48 years ago when I came in here. And that's all about what? Grace, the wonderful program that we have, those steps that absolutely transform. That's what they're there for. They bring us from a place where all we can do is drink alcohol to a place where we wake up to a spiritual awakening. And then we have the community. Isn't it wonderful? You know, I must tell you, you know, that young man that died on the street the other night, just think about this, that apparently, you know, some of the people on the street, they too form a community. The night after he was found, they put their money together, his mother told me, and they went to the dollar store and they bought tea lights so they could have a vigil for him the next night. What do we know about the goodness of God that's in the hearts of people? Whether we live in a palace or whether we live on Skid Row or whatever, God is there, and if we give it a chance, it shows up. So I'm so grateful, Stephen, that you invited me to come. It's just wonderful to see all of you. I wish you the best. You know, it says, if our relationship with God, good things will happen. And that's what I wish for all of you. God bless.